The house in Shaker Heights has a language all its own, one I've become fluent in over 45 years. It speaks in the gentle sigh of the ancient maple tree brushing against the upstairs window, the deep groan of the furnace kicking on in the Ohio winter, and the contented creak of the floorboards in the hall, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. It was the house my late husband Robert and I poured our life into. Bob was an engineer, and he loved this house for its solid bones, its promise of permanence. He chose it, he said, because it was a place a family could put down roots so deep they'd never be shaken. Now, I was the only root left from that original planting. 2 years ago, when our son Michael and his wife Amanda sat at my kitchen table with shadowed eyes and mountains of debt, asking to move in, it felt like a continuation of Bob's promise. Mike had lost his sales job, and with their first child, Noah, on the way, their small apartment was a shoebox of anxiety. "Just until we get back on our feet, Mom," Mike had pleaded, his voice earnest and desperate. "We'll contribute, of course. We'll help with all the heavy lifting, the yard work. It'll be great for you, too. You won't be alone, and you'll get to see your grandson every single day." The arrangement started as a godsend, a balm for the loneliness that had settled in the corners of the house since Bob's passing. The sound of little Noah's laughter was a light switched on in a long-darkened room. I cherished the weight of his small, warm body nestled against my shoulder, the sweet, milky scent of him. I was Grandma Carol, a role I embraced with my entire heart. But the initial dynamic, one of mutual support, began to shift so subtly I almost didn't notice. The contribution became my sole responsibility. Their promise to help with upkeep evaporated into the humid Ohio summer air. My mornings, once a quiet ritual of coffee and the newspaper, became a frantic rush to accommodate their schedule. I'd come downstairs to find the detritus of their previous evening, takeout containers on the coffee table, half-empty glasses sweating onto the antique end tables Bob and I had found in Amish country. Their exhaustion was a constant, impenetrable shield against any request for help. My life, my time, my energy, it was all silently reallocated to their needs. I was the 24-hour daycare, the short-order cook who knew exactly how Mike liked his eggs, the laundress who separated their delicates. The thank yous became perfunctory, then rare, then extinct, replaced by a quiet, insidious sense of entitlement. One afternoon, I found Amanda in the dining room, running her hand over the dark cherry wood of my buffet. "This is nice, I guess," she'd said, her tone dismissive. "A little dated, though. You can get some really clean, modern pieces now. That would really open up the space." She wasn't seeing a family heirloom. She was seeing an obstruction. I was no longer Carol Peterson, the matriarch who had curated this home with love. I was a feature of the house, like the plumbing or the electricity, expected to function silently and efficiently in the background of their lives. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being sensitive. I loved my son, and I adored my grandson. So I swallowed my pride, cleaned up their messes, and held on to the belief that this was what family did, never realizing they were operating under a completely different definition. The tipping point arrived on a crisp Sunday in October, the kind of day where the sky is a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air smells of wood smoke and decaying leaves. I had spent the morning preparing a classic Sunday roast, a beautiful beef chuck with potatoes and carrots, the kind of meal Bob always called a hug on a plate. The 4 of us were gathered in the kitchen. I was at the counter, letting the roast rest before carving, while Noah happily banged a plastic cup on his high chair tray. Mike was glued to the football game on the small TV on the counter, and Amanda, who had been uncharacteristically quiet and listless for weeks, suddenly cleared her throat. She placed a hand over her stomach, looked at Mike, and smiled a secretive little smile. He finally tore his eyes from the game, his face breaking into a grin of understanding. "Mom," he announced, with a flair for the dramatic I recognized from his high school plays. "We've got something to tell you." I turned from the counter, a genuine smile on my face. "Good news, I hope?" Amanda took a theatrical deep breath. "Well, Carol, it looks like Noah is going to be a big brother." For a moment, all the resentment and frustration melted away. A new baby. Another grandchild to pour my love into. I rushed over and hugged them both, my heart swelling with a pure, uncomplicated joy. The news filled the house with a temporary warmth. We spent dinner talking about due dates and dreaming up names, laughing together. It was a fleeting glimpse of the family I thought we were, a snapshot of harmony. But that harmony was short-lived. In the days and weeks that followed, the pregnancy became a weaponized excuse for a new and profound level of lethargy and expectation. Amanda's mild morning sickness was treated like a debilitating illness, exempting her from lifting a finger. Her laundry basket would overflow, her mugs would collect on the nightstand, and the unspoken assumption was that I, Carol, would handle it. Mike became her chief defender. "Amanda's really not feeling well, Mom," he'd say, stepping over a pile of her shoes in the hallway. "Could you just grab that?" The conversations began to feel like tactical maneuvers. The target was always the same: space. "I just don't know how we're going to manage," Amanda would sigh, loudly enough for me to hear from the living room. A bassinet, a changing table, another car seat. This house is going to be bursting at the seams. Her anxiety felt performative, a stage play for an audience of one. The true chilling purpose of this campaign was revealed one evening when I came downstairs for a glass of water. I found her standing in the arched doorway of my bedroom, a tape measure held taut in her hands. She started when she saw me, her face flushing. "Oh, Carol, you scared me," she said with a nervous laugh. "I was just, this room is so lovely and spacious. It gets the best morning light, doesn't it?" The compliment landed with the thud of a threat. She wasn't admiring it. She was assessing it. She was measuring my life for a new set of curtains. They weren't just adding to their family. They were planning a strategic annexation of my territory. And the heart of that territory, my sanctuary, was now in their sights. The indirect assaults soon escalated into a direct diplomatic mission, with Mike cast as the reluctant ambassador. He found me on a Saturday afternoon in the garden, my one true refuge. I was carefully mulching the rose bushes Bob and I had planted on our 10th anniversary, their thorns a familiar, welcome sting against my leather gloves. The garden was where I felt closest to him, where the silence felt like peace, not emptiness. Mike appeared with 2 tall glasses of sun tea, a gesture so transparently strategic it was almost painful to watch. "Hey, Mom," he said, forcing a casual smile as he settled into the white wicker chair beside me. "Working hard, I see." "The yard looks great." I sat back on my heels, the damp earth cool through the knees of my jeans. "It's good for the soul, Michael. You should try it sometime." He ignored the gentle barb, taking a long sip of his tea. "Listen, about what we were talking about. Amanda and I have been running the numbers, looking at the floor plan. And, with the new baby, we're really in a tough spot." I continued to crumble mulch around the base of a particularly beautiful queen, Elizabeth Rose, its pale pink blooms a testament to years of care. "It's a 5-bedroom house, Mike. I seem to recall you playing hide-and-seek in it for hours." He let out a long, put-upon sigh, the sound of a man burdened by the unreasonable sentimentality of his mother. "I know, Mom, but our room, it's just not going to work. It's the smallest bedroom, the window faces the street so it's noisy, and it gets blasted by the afternoon sun. It's a terrible room for a nursery." I finally stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands and pulling off my gloves. I looked him straight in the eye, determined not to let him see the tremor of anger starting in my hands. "And what logical solution did you and Amanda devise?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He had the decency to look away, focusing his gaze on a crack in the flagstone patio. "Well, we were thinking, and please just hear me out, that your room is the only real option. It's the master suite. It's enormous. It's quiet at the back of the house. It has its own bathroom. It's perfect." He finally met my eyes, his own filled with a practiced, pleading look. "We could have all your things moved into our current room. We'd do all the heavy lifting. You wouldn't have to touch a thing. It would just be a simple swap." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was like a physical blow. He was suggesting, with a straight face, that I surrender the room I had shared with his father for 40 years. The room where I had held Bob's hand as he took his last breath, in exchange for their cramped, noisy back room. He wasn't asking for a favor. He was informing me of a decision they had already made. "No," I said. The word was small, but it felt like it was carved from granite. Absolutely not. My room is my room. Mike's face hardened, the mask of the concerned son slipping to reveal cold frustration. Mom, just be reasonable. It's for the baby. It's the only thing that makes sense. I picked up my weeding basket and gloves. The only thing that makes sense is for you to respect that my answer is no. This discussion is over. I turned and walked back into my house, the screen door slamming shut behind me with a finality that he chose to ignore. The final ugly confrontation came 2 days later. They waited until I had just finished reading Noah his bedtime story and tucked him in, ensuring I was a captive audience in the living room. I had settled into my worn velvet armchair, trying to lose myself in a historical novel, but the oppressive silence from the other side of the house was a distraction I couldn't ignore. Finally, they appeared in the doorway, standing shoulder to shoulder like a two-person tribunal. Amanda was the prosecutor. Carol, she began, her voice coated in a syrupy, condescending sweetness. We need to talk to you. We need to finalize this. I deliberately placed my leather bookmark between the pages and set the book on the table beside me. I folded my hands in my lap, a small gesture of defiance. There is nothing to finalize, Amanda. Mike stepped forward, taking on the role of the reasonable mediator. Mom, we think you reacted emotionally the other day. We want to lay this out logically so you can understand why this is a necessity, not a choice. It was Amanda who delivered the closing argument, her voice shedding its sweetness and taking on a hard, brittle edge. We need that room, Carol. Our room is barely big enough for 2 adults, let alone a newborn. There's no cross breeze. The closet is a joke. It's simply not a suitable environment to bring a new baby home to. I looked from her determined face to my son's. His jaw was set in a stubborn line, an expression I knew all too well. It was the look he got right before he made a terrible decision he would later regret. My answer has not changed, I stated, my voice remarkably even, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. This is my house. That is my bedroom. You were both fully aware of the layout of this home when you made the decision to expand your family. Amanda let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Your house? Carol, we live here. We are a family unit. Mike helps with the gutters and I provide companionship for you. The sheer delusion of that statement, that her mere sullen presence was a gift to me, snapped the last thread of my restraint. Companionship? I said, the words finally erupting, hot and sharp. Let's be clear. I cook every meal you eat. I do 3 loads of your laundry a day. I drive across town to that specialty store for your organic kale. I have raised your son for 2 years while you both work on your projects. I am not your companion, Amanda. I have become your unpaid servant. The raw truth hung in the air, stunning them into a brief, shocked silence. But it was Amanda who recovered first, her face twisting into a mask of pure, venomous resentment. An unpaid servant? You should be grateful we allow you to feel useful. Do you have any idea what a burden you are? We can't live our own lives. We can't even arrange our own home to welcome our new baby because we have to tiptoe around you and your precious, dusty memories and your refusal to accept reality. Burden. The word wasn't shouted, it was spat. It landed in the center of the room and lay there, ugly and undeniable. I stared at my son, Michael, my child, desperately searching his face for any flicker of defense, any hint of outrage on my behalf. There was nothing. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on a point on the Persian rug, his jaw tight, his silence a roar of complicity. He was a willing party to my humiliation. In that terrible, silent moment, the love and hope I had held for them shattered. They didn't see me, Carol, their mother and grandmother. They saw an inconvenience, an obstacle, a burden to be managed and shuffled out of the way. A profound, icy calm washed over me. I stood up, my bones feeling suddenly lighter, as if I'd shed a great weight. I didn't trust myself to speak. I simply turned and walked past them, my head held high. I went up the stairs to my bedroom, closed the solid oak door, and for the first time in the 45 years I'd lived in that house, I turned the brass lock. The heavy metallic thud echoed the sound of a drawbridge being raised on my heart, once and for all. I sat on the edge of the chenille bedspread, the same one Bob and I had picked out together, and stared at the silver-framed photograph on my nightstand. It was from our 40th anniversary trip to the Florida Keys. We were tanned and windswept, laughing into the camera, Bob's strong arm a permanent, reassuring weight around my shoulders. Bob, a man who built bridges for a living, had always believed in solid foundations. A house, a life, a family, it's all worthless without a solid foundation, Carol, he would say, tapping his temple. You have to protect it. When the cancer came, his pragmatism went into overdrive. He wasn't just preparing me to lose him, he was fortifying me for the life I would have to lead without him. He'd insisted I sit down with his estate lawyer, a kind, no-nonsense man named Roger Jennings, and go over every single document, every clause, every what-if scenario. The Shaker Heights house was placed in an ironclad trust, with me as the sole trustee. The finances were arranged to ensure my complete independence. No one, Bob had said, his voice thinned by his illness but his will as strong as steel, will ever make you feel like a guest in your own home. This place is your fortress, Carol. Don't you ever forget it? Back then, I had thought his meticulous planning was a touch morbid, a bit of an overreaction. Who would ever dare to make me feel that way? Certainly not our son Michael. Now, Amanda's vicious word, burden, played on a loop in my mind. It wasn't an insult thrown in the heat of an argument. It was a confession. It was how they truly saw me. All my efforts, all my love, my endless sacrifices of time and energy, they weren't gifts to be cherished. They were services to be expected. My very presence, in the home I owned, was an imposition on their grand plans. A new, unfamiliar anger, cold and clear as ice, began to form over the deep well of my sorrow. It was the anger of the profoundly disrespected. I had twisted myself into a pretzel to accommodate them, to be the perfect, helpful, unobtrusive mother and grandmother. And my reward was to be designated a piece of inconvenient furniture. Bob's words echoed in the quiet room. Protect your foundations. They had mistaken my deep well of kindness for a shallow puddle of weakness. They thought the old woman was a docile pushover who could be emotionally blackmailed into a smaller room and a smaller life. They had forgotten who I was. I was Carol Peterson. I was Robert Peterson's wife. And this was my fortress. My gaze fell upon the small black cast-iron safe bolted to the floor in the back of my walk-in closet, a place of honor Bob himself had installed. It held our most important documents, birth certificates, passports, and the deed to the house, nestled securely within the trust. A plan, clean and sharp as a shard of glass, began to form in my mind. It was not born of vengeance, but of a fierce, primal need to reclaim my own life and dignity. They wanted to show me my place? Fine. I would show them theirs. The following Monday morning, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't known in years. I deliberately let Mike and Amanda sleep in, a final, unacknowledged act of service that was entirely on my own terms. I went downstairs, made myself a single piece of toast with butter, and drank a cup of strong black coffee while looking out the window at my garden. The sink held their unwashed dinner plates from the night of the argument. I looked at them with the disinterest of a stranger and walked away. The house was quiet, and for the first time, the silence felt like my own. At precisely 9 o'clock, I picked up the phone and dialed the direct line for Mr. Jennings. His longtime receptionist, a woman named Beverly, recognized my voice immediately and put me right through. Carol, a pleasure to hear from you. Roger Jennings' calm, professional voice came over the line. I trust all is well? I'm afraid not, Roger, I said, my voice low but unwavering. I find myself with a rather serious tenant issue. I could hear the rustle of papers on his end, a brief pause. Tenants? Carol, I wasn't aware you were leasing any part of the property. I took a slow, fortifying breath. In a manner of speaking, neither was I. It's Michael and his wife. They've been living with me. I then proceeded to lay out the entire 2-year history, recounting the facts with the cool detachment of a witness. I detailed the initial agreement, the gradual but total shift in responsibilities, my role as unpaid domestic labor, and finally, the demand for my bedroom and the branding of me as a burden. Mr. Jennings listened patiently, his silence punctuated only by the occasional, I see. When I had finished, he let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry both professional weariness and personal sympathy. Carol, I am so very sorry you're going through this. Bob would be absolutely livid. His words were a balm, a crucial validation that my feelings were not an overreaction, but a righteous response. However, he continued, his tone becoming crisp and businesslike, he was also, as you know, an exceptionally prudent man. Your legal standing here is absolute. The Robert and Carol Peterson Family Trust is the sole owner of the property. You are the sole trustee. In the eyes of the law, Michael and Amanda are tenants at will. They have no lease and pay no rent. You have every legal right to terminate their tenancy. He then walked me through the eviction process in the state of Ohio. It required a formal written notice to vacate, delivered to the tenants, giving them a 30-day period to leave. It was impartial, impersonal, and legally unassailable. Are you absolutely certain this is the course of action you wish to take? He asked gently. This is a bell that cannot be unrung. I looked around my once peaceful kitchen, now colonized by their high chair, their pile of mail, their general clutter. The bridge he spoke of was already in ashes. They had lit the match and fanned the flames. Yes, Roger, I said, my voice filled with a strength I didn't know I still possessed. Please prepare the notice. I can be there this afternoon to sign it. After the call, a profound sense of calm settled over me. I was no longer a victim of their whims. I was an agent of my own life. That afternoon, in the quiet mahogany-paneled conference room of his downtown Cleveland office, Roger slid the document across the gleaming table. The header, Notice to Vacate, was stark and severe. It felt as heavy as a tombstone, marking the death of my relationship with my son, but it was also the key to my own front door. I picked up the heavy fountain pen he offered me and signed Carol Peterson, trustee, with a hand that did not shake. I decided to serve the notice during dinner 2 nights later. Dinner had become their stage, the setting for their passive-aggressive sighs and not-so-subtle demands. It seemed a fitting venue for the final act. I cooked a simple pot roast, a dish so deeply tied to Mike's childhood, a final, silent reminder of the mother I used to be. The meal was a miserable affair. The air was thick with their sullen, palpable resentment. They ate in near silence, the only sounds the clinking of silverware against my good china. They were punishing me with their silence, certain it would break me. Amanda was the first to crack. She pushed her plate away, the food barely touched, and fixed me with a look of pointed impatience. So, Carol, she said, her voice dripping with disdain, have you had any more time to reconsider our logical and practical proposal? We really need to start ordering nursery furniture, and we can't do that until we have the room's dimensions. Mike nodded, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. She's right, Mom. We need a final answer. We're trying to do what's best for your grandchild. I calmly wiped my own mouth with my linen napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. I didn't say a word. I simply rose from my chair and walked to the hall closet. I had moved the safe's contents there for this very moment. I retrieved the large, stiff manila envelope. I could feel their expectant eyes on me, likely assuming I was fetching a checkbook or some other form of capitulation. I returned to the head of the table, the place that had been Bob's and was now unequivocally mine. I held the envelope for a moment, then placed it on the table and slid it across the polished surface. It came to a stop directly in front of Mike. He looked from the envelope to my face, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "What's this?" he asked. "Did you write down the room dimensions for us?" Amanda let out a smug little snort. "It's an answer to your question," I said, my voice resonating with a clarity that cut through the tense silence. "It outlines in precise legal terms your family's living arrangements for the coming month." Mike tore open the envelope and unfolded the papers. I watched as his eyes scanned the bolded header, Notice to Vacate. The ruddy color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, shocked white. He shook his head slowly, as if the words were in a foreign language. "What is this? Mom, what is this? Is this some kind of sick joke?" Amanda snatched the document from his trembling hands. Her eyes widened in disbelief, which quickly morphed into a tidal wave of incandescent rage. "Eviction?" she shrieked, her voice cracking as she shot to her feet, sending her chair scraping backward. "You're evicting us? You're throwing your own family out on the street? This is our home!" she yelled, her face contorted. "No, I said, my voice low and steady, imbued with an authority that stopped her tirade cold. This is my home. You are tenants, and your tenancy has been terminated. According to Ohio law, you have 30 days to find alternative housing and vacate the premises. Mike finally found his voice, a pathetic, strangled whisper. Mom, please, where are we supposed to go? Amanda's pregnant. We have Noah. I looked at my son, the man who had stood by and silently endorsed his wife calling me a burden in my own home. My heart, which should have broken for him, felt nothing but a cold, hard finality. That, I said, meeting his panicked gaze without a flicker of hesitation, is a logistical problem for you and your family to solve. It is no longer any of my concern. The 30-day notice period was a masterclass in psychological warfare fought in the trenches of our hallways and with the artillery of slammed doors. It was an agonizing month filled with every weapon in their arsenal. There were Amanda's staged weeping fits, Mike's late-night phone calls filled with desperate circular pleas, and even a joint, stilted apology that felt so rehearsed it was insulting. I met it all with a quiet, unbreachable wall of resolve. The woman they had seen as a weak, sentimental pushover was gone, replaced by a stranger who simply looked at them and said, "The notice stands." They tried to use Noah as a pawn, asking me to watch him for just an hour so they could go apartment hunting, a request I politely but firmly denied. His care is your responsibility now, I told them, the words tasting like ash and freedom. On the final day of the month, a large, grimy moving truck backed up the driveway, its diesel engine rumbling, its brakes hissing. I watched from the bay window in the living room as two indifferent men began to carry out their life in cardboard boxes. Their flimsy, flat-pack furniture, bags of outgrown baby clothes, the television they were always watching. They took everything that belonged to them, and in doing so, they left behind a house that was finally, blessedly, mine again. When the truck was loaded, Mike stood on the porch for a long, heavy moment. He looked lost. He stared at me through the screen door, his face a jumble of anger, sorrow, and utter bewilderment. He opened his mouth, perhaps to ask a final, unanswerable question, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. He just shook his head and turned away, following Amanda to their car without a backward glance. I didn't feel the rush of victory I had expected. In its place was a vast, quiet sorrow for the son I had raised and the man he had become. The silence in the days that followed was cavernous, almost overwhelming. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo in the emptiness. But slowly, I began to fill the space not with noise, but with my own life. I opened all the windows, letting the fresh autumn air chase out the stale scent of their resentment. I played the old Glenn Miller records Bob had loved, their brassy, joyful notes swelling to fill the rooms. I took the small, cramped bedroom they had occupied and transformed it into a beautiful, light-filled art studio, something I had dreamed of for years. One sunny afternoon, I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, my large, peaceful, gloriously empty bedroom. The air was still. The only presence was mine. There would be no crib crammed in the corner, no mountain of their laundry on the chair. There was just my bed, my books, and the silver-framed photograph of me and Bob on the nightstand, his smile a beacon. I picked it up, gently tracing the outline of his face with my fingertip. "I protected the foundation, Bob," I whispered into the stillness. "Our fortress is secure." A profound peace, deeper than any I had felt in years, settled over me. It was the peace of complete and total sovereignty. I was not a utility. I was not an inconvenience. I was not a burden. I was Carol Peterson, the lady of the house. And in the magnificent, expansive quiet, I could finally hear the sound of my own future, waiting patiently for me to begin.